agenda item number 2. I was hoping that someone else would say so. I can't believe myself. But, so there was just one update from myself. Last night we held our initial investment. What did we call it? The investment. It was an investment committee scoping meeting. I couldn't find the word. Our investment scoping meeting, and that was attended by myself, Councillor Gledhill, Councillor John Kent, Councillor Fraser Massey, Councillor Byrne, as well as the Section 151 officer and our monitoring officer also. Very useful, good session. I'm keen to report back to everybody how useful it was. We went through effectively the work that Camdor Global Advisors have done for us following the meeting held in July in regards to what a governance or increased governance could look like across the whole investment spectrum. And we come out with a broad suite of recommendations which are going to go forward into building a term of reference, which include a shadow board. So we're going to look to establish a shadow board for potentially the period or the rest of the municipal year in terms of getting that right and getting the terms of reference right. We talked about how we make sure that members sitting on the committee are able to have the correct level of competence, so through trainings, etc. And we also had a very detailed investment briefing, to which obviously all members were privy to. So it was a very useful session. There is more detail to come. I think the key message here is that we are on our steps or our way forward in terms of developing a constitutive meeting in regards to the way we handle investments as a local authority. And of course, as I'll share where we are with investments, which is a positive position still, at my particular report later. So just to record that, I don't think there was anything else. So in that case, we will move on to agenda item number 7, petitions submitted by members of the public. We do not have any petitions from members of the public. Do we have any questions from non-executive members as per item 8? No, we don't. And agenda item 9, do we have any matters referred to by the Cabinet for consideration by an overview and scrutiny committee? We don't. Okay, well, we crack on with the key agenda from agenda item number 10. Councillor Cockshaw is going to introduce the Stamford Hove Station redevelopment decision 110527 on pages 17 to 22 of the agenda.
Wait for there's a camera. Yeah. Thank you very much, Councillor Hebb. Tonight is a big milestone for this project as we move forward after the project's been on pause and review for a few bit of time now. We've now come out of here with a better scheme, more deliverable and affordable, and within the budget envelope. The scheme is close to going to the market and needs approval tonight, so we can have a main contractor to deliver the scheme in its entirety. If you approve this tonight, we would order the detailed drawings would go to market on a fixed price, which then satisfies the concerns that members have been raising throughout the last few months and the last year or so, and would stop mission creep in this project anymore. We will have to apply for a new planning permission now. This is essential to deliver the improvements which I think all councillors in Stamford have been for the last a couple of years wanting to actually get a better scheme. That was one of the bigger concerns, to make sure the scheme, and these improvements will need to now go back to planning. Given the procedure exercise and the rating in a new planning permission, this will then start the project in sometime next year, and as quick as possible we will keep pressuring and try and that be subject to obviously more pressure internally from that. I'm sure the Stamford councillors will keep the pressure on me and the officers here to make sure we get this delivered as quick as possible now we're coming out of Pause and Reflect. With that, I'd seek approval so we can start the selection process of a new main contractor.
Thank you, Councillor Cockshaw. Nice and energetic. It's really good. Really good. Colleagues, any questions, comments, narratives that you'd like to lend to this particular item? No? I'm just obviously going to lend something as a resident of Stamford Low, as well as a representative of the people in Stamford Low. I think I can say with licence that everybody just wants the station done. We're at a point where this actually creates, or it is a massive milestone in that objective and journey. And like you say, we have to go back to planning, but we do that in the knowledge that we're going to create extra parking for commuters, which deburdens some of the road network around it, something that wasn't a privilege in the previous scheme. There are a lot of benefits coming out of the Pause and Reflect, so it's not always easy to do them sort of things, but ultimately it's the right thing. Like you say, this time next year we'll be, building the station for commuters and users alike. So brilliant. Well, colleagues, it sounds quite simple. We give it full support by the looks of it. So recommendations 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3 is documented on page 17 and 18 of tonight's agenda. Do I have everybody's agreement, please? Thank you very much. Okay, we move now on to the item agenda number 11, which is the proposed consultation on adult social care non-residential fees and charges 21-22, decision 110528 on pages 23 to 32, and that is headed up by Councillor James Howden, please.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Tonight we're taking the first step to stabilise the social care budget for the long term for our most vulnerable, helping to give our caregivers the financial support they need to meet the increased costs as a result of COVID, and protecting those least able to pay. Now, let me be frank about the challenges and the direct route to solving it. Currently, we charge residents £13 an hour for domiciliary care, while the service actually costs us £17.06 an hour. This is a funding gap of about 33%. And we need to remember that out of almost 1,200 service users, almost 1,000 either pay nothing or only pay a portion of those care fees. Therefore, the level of subsidy the council has to find each year for that system is very, very large. And that gap means that we need to find cash each year to plug the hole in the service, because it is not a fully cost-recovered service. And that's before we can even consider additional items like paying domiciliary care workers more. That does not create the level of stability that I want for our residents. I understand why members for so long have wanted to keep fees low, but the reality is this is not a long-term proposition, certainly not in a post-COVID world where we've got less money to work with and where there are additional financial burdens like the cost of PPE. Frankly, the care market is changing, and we now need to change with it. And let me mention one more risk of not taking action. Currently, Essex County Council pay about 90 pence per hour more than we do. If we don't maintain a degree of parity with them, then the market, frankly, could just vote with its feet. I don't want Thurrock to be in a position where we are seen as a poor relation. I want caring for Thurrock residents to be just as attractive as caring for residents in any other part of the county. If Essex increased their fees and therefore what they're paying their domiciliary care workers, and we don't, it could widen that gap even further. So that's a strategic risk that we can head off now. So you'll see a consultation on three options. We could stay the same, which, as I've outlined, maintains an unbalanced system. We could increase the charges to fully cost recover in one fell swoop, but I feel an increase could be too much too fast. Or we arrive at the preferred option, which is slowly tapering the increase over 3 years to close this 33% gap. This would do the following for the people of Thurrock. It would mean that residents get time to adjust to the gradual change in fees, and it means the system would close a large portion of that gap, and our residents know that the system is stable and can be relied upon for the future. And in addition, it will strengthen our position in the care market in these uncertain times. The fee increases will allow us to go out to consultation with our care providers, and as you'll see in the recommendations in the report, that will be predicated on an above inflation increase in what we pay for domiciliary care for these key workers. That means that as domiciliary care becomes more and more commonplace, as our population continues to age and our care homes deal with their own challenges, it means that we are backing domiciliary care as we need to. And finally, the intention is to end this constant cycle where we have to launch consultation after consultation regarding care fees, haggling over arbitrary figures, because after year 3, we'll permanently peg the yearly inflation cost of delivering that care with the care increase that our residents will see. So we will hopefully put us on a longer term footing where we no longer are in a situation where we need these large interventions every couple of years. We'll be listening to feedback very carefully regarding how we make the changes workable for people and how we make sure the safety net is robust. We're not proposing to reconsider the eligibility criteria on how personal income is exempt for the means assessments, and we're very keen to hear the views and ideas of local people and reflect them in the policy wherever possible. And we have listened to non-executive members on overview and scrutiny regarding what was mooted as a 30-day consultation, which will in fact be a full 8-week consultation that will be designed with Healthwatch. So in conclusion, colleagues, the paper represents an opportunity in a measured and steady way to close the funding gap, stabilise the system for our most vulnerable, and ensure that we are paying domiciliary care providers what they need in what is increasingly a very, very tough market. And with that, I'm happy to open to questions or comments.
Thank you, Councillor Howden. Councillor Cockshall, please.
Yes, it's a pain of the consultation processes. We've had that, and I've seen some good consultation processes and some appalling ones, and we continuously hear from other members and overview and scrutiny and full council that consultations are poorly attended and poorly done. In this crisis that we're in at the moment, and it's always awkward to do consultations, how will we ensure that we gather good feedback from the most vulnerable and act upon this in the next 8 weeks in this serious consultation, because it is quite an important consultation. We need to actually act upon this one.
Well, thank you, Councillor Coxwell, for your question. You're entirely right that it is vital we act upon feedback and we gather feedback from everybody, not just those who are most connected online, so on and so forth. Officers have outlined the ways in which they feel that we are limited in what can be done with direct face-to-face road shows because of COVID, but I'm very clear I want to go above and beyond what the Care Act demands. So the consultation is currently being designed with Healthwatch, which is a statutory third-party independent agency. So it won't just be a council-created consultation. A paper questionnaire will go out to all service users and a link to the consultation sent out through the council newsletter to around 50,000 people to try and capture the views, not just of people in the system, but the friends and the loved ones, the informal carers who also support our residents and those on the edge of care. And on top of that, I know that the Regeneration Department, Councillor Coxwell, has spoken to me about some excellent work that's been done with direct phone consultations regarding the evolving local plan and other issues, the active places strategy. So we'll be looking to crib a few ideas from the Regeneration Department in the same way. We are going to look to some socially distanced events or online fora where possible, and myself and the corporate director are looking forward to meeting with service providers and service users directly where possible as well. And I can give the guarantee that we're going to refer all the feedback to overview and scrutiny and to Healthwatch, so all health partners can pore over the data before it comes back to Cabinet and we make any decisions. And as I said, the consultation is going to be a meaty 8-week exercise.
Thank you both. Councillor Barry Johnson, please.
Thank you, Councillor Shane Hebb. Thanks, Councillor. A really good report with real consultation, which I actually think I thank you for. You think you'd just give a little more around protecting those least able to pay, please?
Thanks, Councillor Johnson. As I've said, the full charge increase is only going to apply based on the current figures of those in the system, would only actually apply to 160 people out of about 1,200 service users. Those 160 people are people who are means assessed to pay, and plus on top of that 109 people who opt not to provide a financial self-assessment. so they opt not to go through the process. 448 people don't pay anything at all, and 589 people only pay a proportion of those care fees. So I don't want people to run away with the idea that this is a large increase for thousands and thousands of residents. That the maximum charge actually has a very, very limited scope. On top of this, the override band is going to be in place, so officers on multiple occasions do use their own discretion to intervene where there are exceptional circumstances. Officers will maintain that flexibility, and the means criteria, which we judge the mean tests for personal income, isn't going to change. So there was a big debate a number of years ago, issues such as what residents will pay for seeing eye dogs. Should that be factored into their personal income? It isn't at the moment. It's considered a cost of care and just written off that way. We're not going to be changing that eligibility criteria. So the current means assessment is going to remain the means assessment. So we're doing everything physically possible to protect those least able to pay. And certainly through the consultation, we're very open to listening to ideas and concerns people have.
Brilliant. Thanks, colleagues. Are there any further questions before we move on to the sum up and recommendations? No, seemingly not. Just about my commentary, Councillor Howden, I think the call around extending the consultation is a sound one. And I think what's very humbling and the right thing to do is also the paper-based consultation element as well. I think to give people 8 weeks the opportunity to make a full and frank contribution gives people time to reflect, give full regard and consideration to it. So totally agree with that, the undertaking that we are about to commit to. So in that case, colleagues, we've got 3 recommendations in particular: 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, as documented on page 24 of tonight's agenda. Can I get agreement, please, from the Cabinet? Thank you very much. That is carried. Okay, we're going back to Councillor James Howden, who's going to introduce agenda item 12, which is the procurement to provide autism specialist support in Medina Road, decision 110529. Councillor Howden, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader. This is a really exciting report commissioning special accommodation and support services for autism. One of the things that I always boasted about when I was the Cabinet Member for Education is the special schools that we have in Thurrock, both rated outstanding. It's a terrific boon to the borough. But what it does do is it does mean that we have a high proportion of people with autism who come to Thurrock because of the level of support that is made available. Projections show over the next 17 years, we're looking at about a 13% increase of adults in the system who have got autism. So we need to look at where you get to the further end of the spectrum and some of the more extreme issues that can be associated with autism. We need to look at supported accommodation, but most importantly, we need to look at ensuring that this is not just a housing issue. This is a pastoral offer where we're helping people maintain their independence, where we're helping people into education or training or employment opportunities where possible, and where we're helping them live to the best degree that we can independent lives. So what we have achieved with Peabody is 6 specialist units with gardens, their own common room, a site that I'm looking forward to visiting with the director very shortly. What we're going out for procurement tonight is the actual support services that is going to be hosted at Medina Road, and I've been very clear that this has to be weighted towards the independent element, that this is not a housing project for people with autism. This is a project to support independent living for people with autism. So it is not just a housing exercise, it is ensuring we cater for those pastoral requirements, and certainly if we get a bidder who can't demonstrate how he's going to interact with Thurrock assets, for example, Aspire, Thurrock Lifestyle Solution, then it's not a tender that I will give my approval to. So this is a very exciting opportunity, and I hope Cabinet will support it.
Thank you, Councillor Howden. Colleagues, any comments or questions on this particular decision to be made? No? Okay, well, Councillor Howden, thank you very much for your presentation. We have two recommendations on this particular agenda item, which is 1.1 and 1.2. On page 33 of the agenda, can I have agreement from the Cabinet, please? Thank you, that is agreed. We move on to a joint report on agenda item 13, which is the annual report of the Director of Public Health 2019-20, which is all about serious youth violence and vulnerability. And I believe Councillor Alan Mays is going to be leading the presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Hebb, and thank you to Ian Wake for producing a fantastic report. This year's Director of Public Health report, as you just said, focuses on the serious youth violence and vulnerability. To start with, I think it would be useful to explain what the public health approach to violence is. The public health approach to violence has 4 steps. 1, surveillance, to identify the nature of problems. 2, identifies the risks and the preventative factors. 3, develops and evaluates interventions to reduce risk factors and improve protective factors. And 4 is the implementation, including scaling up of success. The report aims to deliver the first 3 steps and take us to a point where we can start the implementation. So the public health approach to violence also conceptualises violence as a communicable disease, which starts with a few cases and slowly spreads out or infects the community. It also makes strong use of data and intelligence, and it is a whole system approach. No one agency can solve this problem. There is a need for a concerted action across multiple agencies. Now we know the approach, what the approach has been, we can now start to look at the trends the report shows us. Trends show that the reported youth violence has risen sharply since 2013, until the current administration worked closely with our partners in Essex Police to secure one of the first gang-level injunctions. Since then, figures have fallen. However, there is still more to do. We are still actively engaged with outside organisations who work with our young residents to steer them away from gang and other types of crime. We are, of course, massively disappointed at the prevalence of youth violence and violence with weapons, which has been highlighted in the report. Stats also show that violence is not equally spread around Essex at ward level. There are 6 wards in Thurrock with a disproportionate rate of violence, which is absolutely disappointing. Factors of this could well be easy access to the C2C line, which runs through our borough, which is known to be a route for gangs and criminals to enter the borough. We are actively working with the British Transport Police to monitor and reduce this in the future. This report does highlight the deprivation in, and this report does highlight that deprivation in and of itself is a very poor predictor of violence. The report discusses and explores the crime paradox in depth. Most notably, most of our prison or young offender population have come from deprived and troubled backgrounds. However, on the flip side, the vast majority of people from deprived and troubled backgrounds never commit crime. There are causal and predictive variables, which the report has in some detail. Research suggests that 2 main causal variables, which can be also broken down into 2 sub-variables. The first being the exposure to a criminogenic environment, which under that is the time spent unsupervised in town centres and the association with criminally involved peers. The second being developing a criminogenic personality, which under there would be low scores of personal morality, inventory, and low levels of self-control. There have been some work with the Aspire programme to try and work on to keep on top of this. There are evidence bases in terms of what works, things we're good at, such as promoting family environments that support health and development and provide quality education in early life. Thurrock is very good at these 2 points thanks to our early years and brighter futures provision. There is also preventing gang members and crime caused by gangs and enforcement, target stop and search, disruption of trap houses and drug networks. We're doing everything based on the evidence base suggests, with gang injunctions being particularly effective. There are parts of the evidence base that we know we need to work on, such as the NHS service, of which I know my Cabinet Cabinet colleague Councillor Holden will go into further detail. This report makes series of recommendations which will allow myself and other Cabinet colleagues to work with our partners and outside organisations to address issues and improve on the good things that we're already doing in relation to serious youth violence and vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mays. Councillor Howden, I believe, is going to come in next.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hebb, and thank you to Ian Wake for a terrific annual public health report. I think what the report does is it shows a very clear picture that when it comes to reducing silo working in between departments in the council and outside agencies, we have been terribly effective in recent years. I think the C17 gang in Chafford, I think the last figure I heard was a total of 42 years of prison time has been issued to individuals in that gang through joint action between the council and the police. That's really a tremendous figure if you think of the relatively low base we started from quite a few years ago. There are clearly areas where we need further development, further data sharing, areas such as Operation Encompass between the police and schools, helping schools understand the nature of domestic abuse in households with individual children. We know that there are still gaps with data sharing there, and those are areas that we've got to tackle. But as councillor, but we are putting active resources behind this. We've expanded the youth offending service. There's a specific gang officer in the youth offending service. We put in place a new protocol with schools regarding stop and search, particularly focusing on bladed articles, as Councillor Mays mentioned. But certainly for me, what this report does do, it does highlight that we have got to get very, very serious about tackling the extreme deficiencies we've got with the UMES contract. UMES does not work properly. CAMS did not work properly. These systems have become very unwieldy. UMES in particular has become an increasingly clinical model. And I think that what we are seeing is that when a model becomes so clinical and steers away from prevention work, it becomes too much of a health system alone because of its overly clinical nature. And because it becomes a health system alone, when it gets to the edge of the health system, it becomes a cliff edge and it doesn't adequately interact with other agencies, youth offending, the police. So health inequalities then become exacerbated into other types of inequalities because they're not engaged with other parts of the system, because that part of the system has become too clinical and institutionalised within its own model. We've done work to try and address this in recent years, the £1 million that we put into mental health in schools. Recently, Councillor Mays put together a special subgroup on the Health and Wellbeing Board to look specifically at the contracts that we hold both with NELFT and with EPUT, and going forward we have to address the over-clinical model with UMES, address their lack of prevention work, because they are siloing health inequality, and that is not allowing us to get to the other factors of inequality that rise from deprivation and so on and so forth. So it's an excellent report, and I think that as we go into those very serious negotiations to address some of these big problems, this gives us the weight and the empirical firepower that we really need to have those arguments, and hopefully for the first time have these arguments with NELFT and actually come out better for it.
Thank you, councillors. Colleagues, any comments, questions that you want to raise about the particular report? Well, I think it stands without reason that we need to collectively thank Mr. Ian Wake and the public health team for what is customarily a very comprehensive report into any subject area, but this one in particular, which is very meaningful to all of us across the borough. For all the reasons articulated, we have had some amazing success, and I say we as in a royal we in terms of partnership working with external agencies, with the police. C17 is a great example of actually what we've got right before and actually what we can use as a platform to step up and move forward. The piece around British Transport piece is particularly interesting because there are a lot of areas across the borough, at least of all, or one of them being my own, in terms of station and how criminal migration can come into certain communities and geographies across the borough. That is, again, enthusiastic, and it's great to see this is captured in the report. And equally, there are those that aren't connected to the rail. that have their own challenges as well. So it's good to see that we're looking at specific reasoning, but not only exclusively reasoning and reasons attributable to certain issues. So I think, again, my thanks to everybody involved, and I know Ian has put a whole sort of comprehensive list of people who have contributed, wide-ranging partners. Michelle Cullen, I'm sure, was her usual excellent self in terms of what she does. So I think we can happily say that we are going to support this, but I'll leave it to you to tell me that for sure. Are we going to support the decision 110530, recommendations 1.1, 1.2 on page 41? Agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, we now move on to agenda item 14, which is my own report, which is decision 110531. So I'll begin. The economic impact of COVID has been beyond anything that probably any one of us in this room has experienced professionally or personally in our time. Local authorities as a corporate entity have certainly been no different, certainly those with social care responsibility. For the first time since 2018, Thurrock moves away from a balanced budget for 3 of 5 years presented in the medium-term financial strategy, with surpluses that could be used for public priorities and bolstering our reserves position, to a deficit position. This is a position which has led some councils needing to hold an in-year emergency budget. Thurrock is not one of those, and shortly I'll go into why. Now, whilst that might sound borderline optimistic, I cannot stress enough that we also have a mountain to climb. We are just somewhat better equipped to climb and mountaineer. It is steep, it is going to be tiring, it is going to take everything we have. But what is understood is that I don't think anybody in society really expected things to go back to what they were. I think we all knew that. And what is necessary is quite clearly the need to change and adapt in all manners to master the mountain ahead. But before I go into that change and adapt plan, let me do what this report is actually about, and that is report on the previous 3 months' financial outturn for the first quarter of the municipal year. So you'll remember in my previous report, or the full year outturn report, I made the commentary that was the last financial report where COVID won't feature as the main feature on the stage. And as anticipated, that is correct. We walked into this year, February 2020, with a surplus position of £4 million. However, as a result of the pandemic and the issues that we've had to resolve and work through and continue to work through, Cabinet are giving the authority for the surplus to be used to close down an otherwise £6.3 million budget gap that's come to us since the pandemic took hold. And that takes down our in-year budget deficit, or in-year budget, down to a £2 million variation. At this point, I will make commentary that the government have issued or allocated £10.8 million worth of support to this council in particular at that point. That has been a lifeline for all councils, because the £2 million that I just talked about could have been so very much more had it not been for our government. However, the £6.3 million pressures are pressures above and beyond the support grants from government and involve elements around further losses to fees and charges, COVID-orientated pressures, and delay and cessation of some of the capital strategy activity that we need to do. Last year, Thurrock reversed an in-year service pressure of about £1.5 million without last year's surplus, which was used for capital and public priorities. So what I'm saying to you here is that while the scale of this year is hard, it is achievable. We did 1.5 last year, and where we stand here and now, we have 2 million to achieve in year. There are, however, other concerns that make this year's in-year pressures even more difficult. There has been an increase and a potentially growing increase of local council tax scheme take-up and homelessness when furlough is ending. The Thameside Theatre isn't opening for its key activity of the year, and there are many other examples. I'm not going to report on those at the moment, as we are expecting further statements from the Ministry of Health and Local Government in regards to any detailed additional support for particular sectors, along with the long-term financial settlement position that will be announced toward the end of 2020, and the pressures themselves are confirmed. Important to note that our investment activity has still yielded through this crisis. It's an approach toward the renewable energy sector has continued to defy the impacts of a global pandemic now half a year on. The greatest challenge, however, is next year, or the next municipal year. And shortly I shall come on to the approach which is in the final stages of development to help counteract a deficit of £19 million over the 2021-22 council, but for now let me explain the pressures. Currently we anticipate circa £3.5 million of lost income on council tax and business rate receipts and payout of additional local council tax scheme claims. That's subject to change, you will understand that I'm sure, but those are current working assumptions. There is also another £3.3 million associated with income losses from fees and charges, i.e. around the theatre and other services like the theatre. Other pressures related to COVID, delays to service saving targets being achieved owing to staff and members having to be focused on fighting the impacts of the pandemic, and a need to assess those changes when the post-COVID world is clearly known, and a delay and a desist to elements of the capital strategy that we need to do constitute the remaining pressure. One thing is for certain, had we not had budget surpluses and reserves position, which have been increased by circa 131% on the 2016 levels we inherited, our position would be far worse, and I would be presenting an even more sobering picture than where we are today. And what not widely known is that council tax and business rate collections, in the simplest terms, are accounted for in the year following. This means that the part of the larger deficit next year is a result of that accounting treatment. That isn't a Thurrock thing. That is a national arrangement or a national policy, or not even a policy, working practice that all councils work to. People like the IRV have had discussions with myself, and I with them, the leader with the local LGA, officers with government officials. And we were glad to see in the summer that there has been part of what we'd hoped to see, and that is a degree of relaxation over the loss of receipts over the period of part of the period of the MTFS, which helps ease the pressure, but it doesn't fix the pressure. It still has to be reconciled. But looking at pure spend, COVID-19 has caused 13 million of direct pressure just this year alone, and that's directly caused by COVID, not the outside stuff that's on a knock-on effect. That doesn't account for what else is coming. Worsening tax and rate collections, losses against theatres and other fee-raising services. But let's quickly recognise what pressures would have been had COVID never happened. Our social care department, if we imagine that world where COVID hadn't existed, would be circa £0.5 million positive against the budget of 43 million. Our children's services would have a £0.9 million pressure against a budget of 40 million. Our place and regeneration would have a small 0.2 million pressure out of a budget of 5.3 million. Environment, highways, adult social behaviour, anti-social behaviour, all report break-even positions. Finance, assets, internal services clustered, all coming under budget. Quite simply put, this time, had COVID not happened, our council would be almost break-even, surplus and reserves intact. However, as you all know, we are not in the world where we want it to be, and the hard reality is quite stark. Our adult social care department has had to maintain resilience in the home care market to the tune of 10% of the budget of their budgets. Reacting to the crisis with hospital discharges and internal care has led to an unforecasted spend of a budget of over 1.2 million. The service, which includes libraries and community hubs and daycare centres, has lost over £500,000 on discretionary residential services. And the fact that the impact is only noted as 4.8 million is owing to two things. One, the government's financial support, and two, the team doing their usual best and providing care in the most prudent way in a market left utterly shaken by this pandemic. And that is why we need to look at the social care sector's financial base and resilience in the post-COVID world. In children's social care, the key stress is unknown and new entrants into the social care system. The report articulates that the numbers of new children into the system have and are likely to increase, and we estimate that current pressure being about £1.4 million. And one of the large costs, for the right reasons of ensuring that children have a safe home and a caring family to live with, is owing to placements with external foster care agencies and providers. This is a piece of work that Councillor Helder's led on, and I've been working alongside him to help develop plans to help create a more positive outcome, which is more positive for the children who are in them arrangements, but also for the authority handling it. And as expected, the service has lost nearly £1 million from when the education and care premises shut during the social distancing period from middle of March onward. And as the markets reactivate slowly, clearly it's not a straight switch back on to where we were. Our Environment, Highways and Antisocial Behaviour departments have accounted for the utilities costs of the closed impulse leisure assets when they were shut, who have now, as a point of interest, managed to trade for 3 weeks after first reaching out to us as the council for support. But they also, as a department, projects other losses outside of impulse, which are COVID related, owing to need to spend more on personal protective equipment, the losses of car park fees, trade waste, as businesses furlough. A lot of small businesses use Thurrock's trade waste, and because they're furloughed, quite clearly that is a service that hasn't been used or utilised. Underplaced, most relevant for the public, I think, is the Thameside Theatre. I don't think anyone ever expected back in mid-March an outcome which, like this, that COVID would do what it has done in that regard to many pursuits and objectives that we all have as people and professionals. And the future of Thameside has been at times uncertain. And this only adds to the uncertainty around the Thameside asset. But Councillor Hewlin is working stringently with officers to review that position. Owing to market instability, there has been a delay of planning income. Now, quite separately, the Prime Minister and Councillor Cockshaw, one in Whitehall and one in Grays, have set out plans for a national and local recovery to be regeneration heavy. To support this objective, I can confirm that I've given approval for the use of £1 million of a very specific growth reserve to support Councillor Cockshaw's department begin the third and final stage of the local plan refresh, to get Britain and Thurrock moving, to provide the homes we need for our families and new homes for families who are re-evaluating where they live during lockdown, where working from home is now far more frequent, and what they once looked for in a home is now a lot different to what it was 6 months ago. So we need a forward plan, and Thurrock is in the need of renewed household economics. Quite simply, no silver bullet will do. Families and households struggling across this borough have had no choice but to confront the economic challenges which has affected the quality of living. Thurrock will have to and will be doing the same. We will need to look at this situation, or we would choose to, much like any family who has lost household income. And there are questions that we are asking here which are relatable outside. What savings do we have? How can we reduce the income gap through earning other activity? Are there projects which we were going to do this year or next that we will now need to do another day? Is there a few one-off things that we can all do to help get us by? And what spending commitments do we have that we can no longer sustain if this carries on in the way that it has done? So if we look at the savings, let's talk about that first. During the boom years, if you want to call them that, the council and the administration sought to increase our general reserves for a rainy day. These general balance reserves have been built up by circa 131% since 2016 levels as a direct outcome of the investment approach, enabling us to build up those reserves. That is an approach, as well remarked before, which was endorsed by all members back in 2017. They have been increased from single to significant double-digit millions through the surplus budget positions being achieved since 2018. And being prudent with those surplus funds means that we have a good degree of fallback to absorb some of the shock and pressure that is coming. Effectively, our savings will, in part, now start to be used to close off some of the gaps that we have. But I will be clear, we do not plan at this moment in time or at present to go under 2016 general reserves levels of £8 million, and our medium and long-term planning will seek to increase or replace rather any general fund balance reserve taken out back to pre-COVID levels. The intention is to save back up, get the reserves back to the optimal levels we use them for as a result of the investment income surpluses. So how do we reduce the income gap through other activity or work? A combination of council tax and business rate income loss, pressures no one ever expected to make because of an international pandemic, a growing increase in benefits being paid out quite rightly to people now in need, a significant loss of income and fees have made a situation unimaginable. Council tax and business rates are, despite what I've just said, the most likely form of income stream in any economic environment. A couple of months ago, my shadow opposition spokesman, Councillor Gerrish, asked me how regeneration fits into the recovery. It's a sound question. It's a conversation that I've come accustomed to from Councillor Gerrish. It's pragmatic. He was on the PTR meeting, I think it was last Monday, where they went through that, and obviously Councillor Cockshaw's got reports coming forward as well. And I've already talked to you about the local plan refresh. Council tax is forecast to increase every year over the line of the MTFS. That is something which I will be very clear is something that we do all the time. This isn't a COVID-related thing. We always model a increase in council tax. At this present moment, there are no plans to change that model. Equally, all councils have done across the nation, or as all councils have done, they have made full use of the adult social care precept, and that goes back into the part around resilience around the social care sector. However, if a precept becomes a tangible option, that is something that we will need to consider for a lot of the reasons that Councillor Howden has already articulated. Are there projects that we're going to do this year or next that we're going to be putting off? Well, our foresight serves us well in regards to the investments have not been affected by an international pandemic, and they continue to perform at a level expected before COVID was even a thing. However, we have had to pause and desist some of our capital strategy work. The investment market for new investments is not what it once was. We had our first investment committee, like I mentioned earlier, to get members' engagement and appetite for that particular policy. We have always said that while the market for investments was open, it would enable us to reform services over the longer term. It was a means, never an end. And as bonds of existing investments are repaid, we will not necessarily have the new opportunities to take out or replace them. And we therefore now need to begin the work that we was already in part way through doing, making a council which is more self-sufficient from government funding, revenue funding, but also therefore a council which is smaller and more rationalised. That has always been the plan. We are already part way through the council spending review service review programme. Quite simply, it just means that the next phase of it is going to have to be done quicker than any of us ever anticipated. The inverse can be said for our approach to capital projects. We need to take a pause and not plough on with capital spending on projects that we would love to have delivered in the next 12, 18, 24 months, but simply no longer can, or we need to look at different ways of how we fund those projects. In reality, most of the time, we can wait a few more years. We are going through a full review. I think the Section 151 officer made that comment at the Corporate Review and Scrutiny meeting. At the moment, we're at a point, like many households, can we spend something of a fraction of a price compared to a big project that we planned to do at the start of the year, which is now no longer within our grasp of remit because of the economic environment. We're having the same discussions here, and it's now time to pause and reflect on that. Is there a few one-off things we can do to help? Yes, there is a report coming to October Cabinet, so in 4 weeks' time or 5 weeks, where we will articulate some of what that looks like. That's certainly around some of the piece around the collection fund that I was talking to you all about how there's that delay of a year for this year's council tax in terms of the collection fund. We will update you accordingly. And lastly, what spending commitments do we have that we can no longer sustain if we carry on? As we begin to work towards a council which is self-sufficient and can withstand future economic downturn, the council will need to cost less. No one around these benches is unclear that the review and reform of services is essential to get the cost base of the council to operate at a self-sufficient level. I have urged caution with tone before, and I'm going to ask and urge again. These are conversations which are going to be making residents and potentially staff of this authority question what is going to come. I urge that all members take a constructive suite of dialogue to this. I can't make people do it, but I will certainly urge it because it is the right and appropriate thing to do. We will, of course, come back to members at the appropriate points. It is a certainty that the size of the council will need to reduce over the coming years. And again, we shall revert in the future. And as I close, I'm remembered of this, a saying from a man called Arnold Bennett. Any change, even a change for the better, is always accompanied by discomfort. And again from George C. Lichtenberg, I can't say whether things will get better if we change, but what I can say is that they must change if we are to get better. So, a bit of poetry for you all to reflect on, but I've been thinking a lot about change lately, and I think it's something that we all need to do as a community of members. So I'm going to open up to comments and questions from any colleagues. Sorry, that was quite a long presentation, but for the obvious reasons, it was appropriate that I gave the full strength position of where we are and the challenge ahead of where we need to get to. Colleagues, any questions, comments? No. For the benefit of the recording, everyone is nodding. No. Sombering discussion. sorry that it isn't the most optimistic of tones. It is what it is, and it's the challenge that we have to confront. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. I therefore move the recommendations on page 162. Is that right? No, beg your pardon, 163, which is recommendation 1.1, cabinet comment on the MTFS and the outturn position for 2021. Do I have agreement? Thank you. Okay, we now move on to agenda item 15, which is, as I mentioned earlier, Councillor Cockshaw, which is backing Thurrock, a 5-year strategy for economic recovery, resilience and a return to growth.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Deputy Leader. Shame him. And I don't have to tell you that Thurrock is a great place to do business, but I just want to mention 3 good reasons why. We're right next to the world's greatest capital, I must say, and we have great transport links to the rest of the UK and great transport links to the rest of the world. In fact, during this process in April this year, we opened our brand new big international port that's Brexit ready and ready for any Dover traffic and Dover trade that we're going to take for Thurrock to Thurrock. We have a dynamic and fast-changing economy here, thanks to this administration that's fleet of foot, moves very quickly, as quick as we can, and is committed to the business community around in Thurrock and the jobs and growth that provides. I know the private sector, though, is still keen to invest in Thurrock, and we are determined that the growth that's coming over the next, not just the next 5 years of this plan, but the next 20 years of the local plan, should be infrastructure first, which we've always said since 2016, community driven, and must benefit our existing residents and businesses, the communities that are already here. And I'm pleased to introduce this draft plan of economic growth recovery and a return to growth today. The plan does recognise a few underlying strengths of the local community, but there is the economic downturn caused by this virus has had an impact on jobs and prosperity of the area we live in. And while setting out the immediate actions in this plan to help recovery, it does recognise we cannot do this on our own, and they need collaboration with a multitude of other communities, the community and the business community and other public bodies here, to make sure we can implement this plan in the long term. We'll work to implement this plan at the same time as consultation, so we're ready to a clear start and a right running in 2021. In the meantime, we can do all our bit for our businesses and our jobs here in the future by buying locally, buying from business in Thurrock, and start our economy going, and the future prosperity of our people who live here. With that, and a great future ahead of us lies.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Cockshaw. Colleagues, any comments, questions? Councillor Howden, please.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. Reading your draft strategy, Councillor Cockshaw, I was pleased to see the reference to care leavers and the learning disabled and how we support people at the more vulnerable end of the spectrum, try and maintain jobs, or if they need to retrain and reskill so they can access new opportunities. I think it's very important as we go forward and we look at the accelerated local plan that we very, very carefully cast the widest net possible. For example, we've done a lot of work looking at the economically vulnerable. We weren't aware that part of the health system had withdrawn the World of Work funding that supports learning disabled adults, lots of clients from Thurrock Lifestyle Solutions. That's funding that Thurrock Council has stepped in and restored. So we just need to make sure that as we go forward and as we look at the tremendous opportunities that this extra £1 million for the local plan presents us with, that we do consider the needs of the vulnerable, the needs of care leavers, and look at where parts of the health system also need to be supporting your strategy, where parts of the education system need to be actively supporting the parts of your strategy, because the council can't do it alone. The council can't support the private sector alone, and when we're looking at the vulnerable, the private sector will require some help and some steer from us as well.
Yeah, I quite agree. The issue that you could, I mean, when growth comes and prosperity comes, we can then worry about, we do indeed have to worry about the most vulnerable in our communities, and the people are much harder, and it's going to hit the young and the learning disabled much harder coming out of this. And I think it's a duty of the public bodies like ourselves to make sure that we're able, that we're doing great work beforehand, trying to get this to go, encourage people to get into the work. But I think prosperity comes with a good job, and a good job comes and we get growth, and that's the way. And if we don't do that, that is the one part of the failures of this administration. If we don't get that, and that means it's an opportunity to everyone. Yeah, it's so I think this has got to be part of that. And you're right that it's not just the private sector; it is public bodies across the public body board. And I've had this conversation at a LEP meeting recently, about how it's important and driven with the Kickstart program that the government, central government programs are great programs, but there is still some holes in great programs, especially in retraining. And I think that's an important message we need to think about, how we reskill and retrain. And then if there is holes there and there's holes in the government fundings, I think it's an opportunity for us through our select partners and other public bodies to make sure we can fill them holes, and then that we can make sure that, just like you've just explained, that is an important part of this growth. It's not just about, we can talk about housing and money and jobs, but that is an important part, because that helps us with the funding to actually make sure these, but they must never be forgotten. They should be part of an economic growth strategy.
Brilliant, thank you. Colleagues, any further questions, comments? Okay. Councillor Coxhill, thanks for bringing the report forward. I totally agree, and I'm very happy, well, I'm not happy to see it at all, but I'm glad to see that there has been acknowledgement and reflection on people in the hospitality sector and so forth, who are obviously of the lowest, some of the lowest incomes, were probably struggling to make ends meet before middle of March. And that whole conversation you just had was when you about the training is going to be so critical. There's going to be loads of us that remember previous recessions which impacted us significantly. You know, I can look back 10 years and look back to 2008. There is now a new generation that are going to look back to 2020. So I'm really glad that we've already highlighted the people that are more likely to find themselves in the most austere times, the most desperate times, and help develop them plans to help get them to a more positive place. Like you say, it's not just about building houses, it's actually about personal growth and being able to earn wealth through work and with the right qualifications and development. You wanted to come back in, Councillor Coxhill?
Yeah, that's just forgot something, because it was while reading this with us, 5 years ago, we weren't in administration then, and I must congratulate the last administration on this, because that was a very good plan that was followed through in the last 5 years, and there's actually quite a lot of that plan has moved forward into this. I know it's had to be majorly changed from where we were, and there's an opportunity tonight to make sure we're moving forward into January. But that, I must say, the last administration, that plan was very good. I think it was and I wasn't a mere councillor then, but rereading that plan and where it's gone to, I think it's done as well in the last 5 years. I think it's just bringing it forward and making sure the next 5 years we can do this plan. It's going to work just as well.
Thank you, Councillor Coxhill. Credit where credit is due. Frankly, ultimately, we've never shied away from supporting, when in opposition, the right things. It sounds as though this is still something that we can reflect on and look positively. You know, I like to hope that at some point that will be reciprocated. But frankly, your point is very fair. Great credit. So, right, agenda item 15. The recommendations are noted at 1.1, 1.2 on page 190. Can I have agreement from the Cabinet that we agree? Thank you very much. And we go on to our last agenda item. Let's not skip one. Agenda item 16. Which is the report of Councillor Hewlin on the Quarter 1 Corporate Performance Report 2021 and the NGA Corporate Performance Report 1920. Councillor Hewlin, please.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Councils, along with police and fire brigade, plan for emergencies. Together they practice scenarios for things like gridlock traffic, industrial fires, power cuts, but no one saw a pandemic coming and a worldwide crisis on the horizon. On the 23rd of March this year, Boris told the country to stay at home and businesses to close. It's important to remember that this first quarter report started just 1 week into lockdown and measured council performance for the next 3 months. Whilst many residents in Thurrock woke up on the 24th of March to fears for the safety of themselves and loved ones, wondering what to do next, 2,000 council work staff woke up with the same fears, yet knowing they needed to continue delivering vital services, keeping residents safe. They needed to do their job and more. Yes, bin collections went a bit wonky whilst the waste management team worked out how to safely distance 3 people 2 metres apart in a lorry cab in order to mobilise waste carts and collect rubbish. Of course, it takes longer with new working practices requiring more employees to operate it. I can only imagine the headache of trying to recruit and train staff during lockdown and keep them safe. It's not surprising we've missed a few. Protocols and policies flew out the window and red tape was cut in order to keep us safe and in some instances literally keep us alive. Council staff and the voluntary services became the 4th emergency service. In those first few weeks, over 9,000 residents were identified for categorised government shielding and personally contacted regarding their health and support they may need. Residential care homes were contacted on a daily basis to ensure they had adequate PPE and were okay. The IT department worked their socks off to mobilise systems so call centre staff and service providers could continue to operate from home as the civic offices had to be closed. Theatre staff and environmental enforcement officers organised and distributed emergency food parcels to shielding residents. Librarians learnt how to triage emergency calls and help operate the COVID call centre with Strong Together and CVS. I cannot thank our staff, CVS and all of Thurrock's volunteers enough for their help. Within days, the emergency coronavirus community action was set up to help vulnerable residents, and over 500 volunteers were collecting prescriptions and doing essential shopping for those having to isolate. At the end of the last municipal year, we finished on a record high of 74% of our services achieving their target. The first quarter of this year is at 65.5%. Unsurprisingly, performance looks like it dropped, but 10 out of 11 failed targets were directly impacted by COVID-19, and the other one was an extended planning application. So yes, our budget is overspent, but that's the price I'm willing to pay to keep our residents safe and well. Recycling was down because the waste sites had to be closed during lockdown. Graffiti was up. Keep Britain Tidy has said graffiti volumes were up right across the UK during lockdown, and that says more about the characters of individuals than it does about our service. Fees and charges down, not surprisingly, as the theatre was closed, weddings cancelled, car parks empty. Inspections of private landlords were suspended, renovations also had to be suspended. We're going to keep the performance targets for 2021 based on last year's normal. As we navigate our way through this unprecedented year, I'm sure a new normal is going to evolve, and so too will our services. But for now, by keeping targets as they were in 2019 and continuing to keep a clear record of why a target is not achieving, it'll help us better understand the impact of the pandemic moving forward. So for the first 3 months of this municipal year, let's really measure our success by the fact that Thurrock Council did not grind to a halt on the 24th of March. Essex Police and County Council looked to Thurrock Council for help and advice on emergency measures and best practices during the crisis, because we are blooming good at thinking outside the box, because we have staff that are willing to go over and above a normal day's work, that have the power of looking like swans gracefully gliding along a river whilst actually tearing their hair out and arms and legs galloping at 100 miles an hour, keeping our services operational, and amazing voluntary services to back us up. I'm pleased to report Overview and Scrutiny agree with us and have no recommendations to add this quarter.
Thank you, Councillor Sheridan. A good summary, fair and frank. Colleagues, any particular comments you wish to make about your own department? I'm going to go to Councillor Watkins first, followed by Councillor Howden. You have to press the button, Councillor Watkins. Councillor Howden.
So I agree with Councillor Hewden's comment that organisations like Essex County Council did look to us for advice, and one sense is if they want further advice on how to run their authority, they might get the opportunity very soon.
Thank you. You ready to go, Councillor Watkins? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader. It is now working. Obviously, I know I mentioned it in the last statements for council, but I just wanted to echo, because I think when people can see the KPI results and obviously can see a negative from it, it detracts away from the amazing work which my team have done over the last, well, since March, all the time they do, but in particular since March. I won't necessarily touch on all the points that Councillor Hewlins made in relation to the Environment Department. Obviously, it was a shame from the bin collections, but after a couple of years of some KPIs being missed, but for the first time, I think last year, it was about 10 months successively where we had hit KPI scores continuously. But as to provide a report June, and I will also be saying that July, unfortunately, the numbers aren't necessarily as good as they should have been, but we have seen that picked up in August. There's been numerous reasons why, which have obviously come out over recent weeks into the relation to why there has been some of these issues in regards to our waste collections. We have had the issues in relation to staff shortages, and obviously that did seem to kick in more towards the June and July time. And obviously we do have to remember that COVID hasn't gone away, although lockdown restrictions obviously have eased since the June period of time. We have not got out of this COVID period, and rightly so, but we are still following the right precautions with all our staff and members. And I would also like to say thank you as well to the unions as well for their work over the COVID period as well, and also allowing us to get the agency staff in order to help the service pick up where we have obviously had staff shortages. We have also had the issues in relation to the increased amount of tonnage. In the MTFS report, there was obviously the section in relation to the sheer amount extra which we are collecting. This is primarily down to more people being at home than we would have necessarily anticipated, and that is causing delays onto the service, and it still does cause delays onto our service as we currently speak. Obviously we are back up where we are in August. In relation to recycling, Councillor Hewlin also did comment on the closure, rightly so, of the HWRC site. Since its reopening, there's been incremental stages as to the amount of people allowed on site, and that has helped us some way. The recycling rate numbers are unfortunately disappointing for that period of time, and partially maybe due to the sheer amount of extra tonnage people were having. Unfortunately, they were not recycling. However, two good things I can announce in relation to upcoming changes to recycling. Firstly, I announced yesterday, which was for a committed spend following a very successful pilot, but a communal bin store launch across the entirety of Thurrock is now going ahead and will take place over 2020 and going into 2021, which will see a massive uplift in our recycling rates across the communal bin stores, which obviously does have a real positive impact, not just on the environment, but also on our revenue in relation to waste disposal costs. And the Waste Group, which is a cross-party led group, will be presenting their report to October 1st CGS before coming to Cabinet in October as well, which will be outlining their approach and suggestions to the future of waste within Thurrock, with very much recycling being one of the main focuses within that.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Colleagues, any further questions or comments on the notes within the report? No? Okay, well, look, Councillor Hewlin, thank you for your report. I think it's that, what's the saying, life isn't a dress rehearsal. Well, you couldn't dress rehearse anything that anyone, not only public sector, but private sector, no one could have rehearsed what we've just gone through and what may come still. But we do have to hold heads high and know that, yeah, there were some things that did understandably fall down. I'm sure we all in our own personal lives have dropped something because we've had to deal with something associated with COVID. Professionals are still people, and these things do happen, but ultimately we managed to keep heads above water. I think vast majority of the time managed to deliver on the key commitments that we needed to keep our people safe and environments attractive as best as possible through the certainly the earlier stages of the pandemic and certainly the lockdown area. They're understandable reading in terms of the KPIs, and obviously, like you say, we'll continue to work on and build and improve on that as things become more certain in time, and we can react with better informed knowledge of the pandemic and the impacts it's had. Colleagues, do we agree to recommendations 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 on page 210 of our agenda tonight? Agreed. The Cabinet have agreed. Turned off the mic. That is now the formal, or the end of the agenda, sorry, so I'm going to conclude the meeting. Thank you everybody for their attendance. And I'll close the meeting at 20:09. Thank you very much.